walk into a market and everywhere you look is an episode. And I think there's a version of this where everything from a sesame seed to a watermelon has something really special to say about us. And that's kind of the point of this.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Matt Rodbard. Matt Golding is in the studio, and we have a great chat about his new series on Apple TV+, Omnivore. I've known Matt for years and really love his writing, which comes to life in a series of memorable books as well as in the online magazine he co-founded, Roads and Kingdoms. On this episode, we talk about Spain, Italy, Japan, and how we covered each country with memorable prose. And we discuss his extremely cool collaboration with Rene Redzepi. Omnivore is food TV at its most visually stunning, and we talk about the process of getting the show made. It's so fun having Matt into the studio, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Matt Golding, welcome to This Is Taste. It's so great to see you, man.
Dude, it's honestly so happy to be here. I was, like I told you before, I was thinking about us doing an interview back in 2016.
It's crazy that we go back that far, and I want to get right into your books before we get to Omnivore, which is on Apple Plus now. I love this show.
Amazing.
I've screened like 6 episodes and binged them. Everyone should. I'm going to link to my interview with Rene Redzepi, who's your co-creator. Terrific conversation I have with Rene. But first, for you, when you're writing your books, you wrote a book about Japan, a book about Italy, and a book about Spain.
Yep.
And these books that you did with Echo, to me, are some of the most important books in publishing because they were breaking form. When you're writing these books, tell me, what were you thinking? What were you thinking about the process? And did you know that you were actually doing something really remarkably original?
Oh man, honestly, I really, really appreciate you saying that, man. That means a lot coming from you. I knew that we were in some nether region of the publishing world, largely because they couldn't even really figure out where it was going to live on the bookshelves in a certain way. They're like, is this travel? Is this food? Is this? Is this that? So that part was cool. I mean, for me at least, maybe not for the publisher. But in my mind, what it was, honestly, the way that it started was I was traveling through Japan. I was on my honeymoon, a long, extended 90-day honeymoon in Japan, basically. And was like trying to find resources, like trying to find that thing the stuff that I love to read before I go somewhere, which honestly was this mixture and is this mixture of literature as well as some information to kind of guide me in the right direction. And I was like, there wasn't much there in the Japan space, certainly not outside of Tokyo or Kyoto. And I was like, what if we found something that kind of took both of those, above all, heavy on the literature, but like all pointed in the direction of giving people context for what this food culture means and allowing them to, as Tony would say, stumble into their own experiences, but armed with this information that gives them a sense of what is what on the ground.
Yeah, and you mentioned Tony Bourdain, who was your business partner at Roads and Kingdoms, and I will leave the story of Roads and Kingdoms for another conversation. You and I will catch up again because I just love seeing you, and you just aren't in New York a lot. But I hear a lot of rice noodle fish in Omnivore, and I have to say, I'm going to talk about the show now. The writing is incredible. Like it's Rene reading these lines that you've written and Ben has written and others have written, and you're telling the story of food, but it has real narrative poetry to it. When you and Rene were in that room deciding to do a show, and Ben, what's going through your mind, and what are you thinking you need to bring to the food world that isn't there?
The thing is, Rene called kind of at the end of 2019. It has been about a year and some change since Tony had died. And it was kind of, for me personally, like, where do we go from here? What do I want to do? What do I want to be a part of? But also kind of that bigger picture of like, where do we go with the food? Like when I started my career in the early 2000s, I was like writing recipes and doing small little restaurant reviews for New York Mag. Like that was what food writing was kind of about. And then suddenly there was like chef profiles and, the end of that first decade. And then there was bigger long form pieces. And then there was the books and like, the things that we could do with food, as you very well know, because you do those things and you are part of that change, continued to expand ever outwards. And I think obviously working with the guy who was so responsible for that expansion and that evolution was the great privilege of my life. But also thinking after his passing, what is next? Like, what's that new frontier? How much farther can we push food as a lens or as a jumping off point for hopefully just entertaining and meaningful storytelling? And then Renee calls. And the truth is, like, I was a little bit in this mode where, like, I'd worked with Tony and I'd worked with Jose Andres for many years as well. Two people who had inspired me so much. But I was also thinking, yeah, maybe I should just kind of go do my own thing. And then Renee calls. And it was like, oh, you.
That guy.
That guy.
Who all of these figures, these in your orbit, revolved around in a way, just at least in the fine dining restaurant scene. And Jose is, of course, our chef, but there's no place like Noma and there's no guy like Renee.
No, that's exactly right. And I think the piece that was so immediately exciting to me was this guy represents all these incredible layers of complexity and sophistication and interesting conversations around food, but also, above all, in the natural world. Time and place, that was always the ethos of Noma. And he, for me, Renee has always been Attenborough-esque in how he thinks about food, how he talks about food. And so the idea of kind of trying to aim for a Planet Earth-like series, at least in terms of its scope, with Renee as a partner was amazing. And so that was a jumping off point where it was like, okay, now how do we build this?
Did Renee have that reference?
Renee had that reference. I remember talking with Ben Liebman early on when he also mentioned it, and I was like thinking, okay, cool. And I just spent a couple months kind of on my own playing with that idea. Like, what does it actually mean? How does that actually get executed? And I think it was clear to us all, like, it has to be through ingredients. We built this around 8 ingredients. Every ingredient is a different journey into the heart of the human experience.
It's really remarkable how these 8 ingredients in your first season are shot and told in such different ways. You have different directors on some of the episodes. You're on set in Japan, in Spain, in New York, you could say all the other places, but
sure.
Matt, how are you producing the show, which ultimately will be written, because the show is a narrative show where Renee is in the studio reading lines that are beautifully written. How are you actually shooting the show? Because I think that's a big part of it.
No, it's a great question, because I think typically in a documentary form, like, you would build an outline, you would have the locations, you'd have a general sense of the kind of story you wanted. You send out a field producer, and the field producer kind of starts providing you with options. In this case, we approached it much more almost like a scripted show. Like, I sat down for months, like probably about 9 months, and wrote all 8 scripts. Real, not necessarily shooting scripts in the classic, like, scripted sense, but long scripts that could essentially serve as that.
Dude, this is your writing.
This is it.
My instinct was like, Matt Golding wrote this.
This is,
show. This is amazing.
I only know, I only know how to write the way that I write, and trying to find that voice, but also bring it into this new format was super exciting, but also crazy challenging, because you're trying to imagine how to pull all these pieces together. Because what we knew right away, and this is a credit to Renee was not going to be a guy. He wasn't going to be a host. He wasn't going to be on camera a bunch.
3 minutes, he said. It was like the max he would be on camera for each hour.
Yeah, he wanted that as like a contractual limitation to his presence on camera. And I think in general, the understanding with Apple, and to their credit, like, they saw this right away. It was like, let's find the right moments when something from Renee's life inspires a deeper reflection on the ingredient, but really the ingredients are the stars, and the people around those ingredients are the stars of the show, not Renee. But I think that was a kind of a wild jumping off point, because you're thinking, all right, there are a million stories about rice and salt and corn and tuna, and how do you choose all of those? And ultimately, the way that I wanted to do it, and the way that we talked about internally, was the idea of a concept album.
Mm-hmm.
Every song has its own cadence, its own rhythm, its own lyrics, but it's all tied to some larger meaning, some larger project that has a narrative arc of its own. And that's hard to do because it means you're kind of reinventing things time and time again. But the opposite of that, which is just a kind of a plug and chug formula, just was not the show we wanted to make.
And it would have been a show that would have been derivative. Apple probably wouldn't have bought it. You might have ended up on one of the other places.
For sure.
And ultimately, those come and go. And I feel the way you wrote the show and shot it, there's a timelessness there, and more about the production, because now that it's kind of like an onion, it's unpeeling a little bit.
Sure.
It's like you're telling me you wrote the 8 episodes and you scripted them. So you're going on set to shoot these, and you're basically doing coverage for the VO that you wrote.
In many cases, that's really how it worked. And I think some of the episodes were kind of more tightly wound in terms of the scripting, and they really were kind of going through scene by scene, getting coverage, getting pickups, thinking about that, but always leaving space for the reality is that these are real humans living their real lives. And like, we're not going to tell them what to do or what to say. They're going to do what they do, and they're going to say what they say. But in many cases, these are people who I've already reported on, or people that Renee knows from his life, or stories that I've kind of had in my back pocket that we can build a foundation on. And then, of course, you want to leave room for a director to come in and add her or his spin to this. And so there's a bit of a balancing act there, to be sure. But then, ultimately that was the job, was like trying to find a version of each one of these stories that made the viewing experience confident and sort of well-defined enough that you didn't spend your time thinking, well, why didn't we go here? Why aren't they taking me to Italy instead of Spain? Why are we just in one village for pig? Why is this tuna going from here to there? Like, we wanted it to be almost self-evident when you watch it, like, this is the one story that they really wanted to tell.
You make choices about who you're casting, but you're not necessarily telling the, like, birth to death story of a community or a chef or whatever. You're basically covering your broad voiceover scripts with some of the most evocative photography that I've seen. And a couple scenes come to mind. One is just the way you showed a pig slaughter. And I was talking to Renee about this, but I'd like to get your sense of how you went into the slaughterhouse in Spain, and you were, really pushing the envelope for a U.S. audience, at least. How did you think about that slaughterhouse?
Well, I should say that I first came upon that slaughterhouse, that factory where those jamons and all the other cured products are produced, which is called Fermín, in La Alberca in central Spain. In 2010, with Jose Andres, he took me and a group of chefs over there to kind of experience what's called the montanera, the fattening of the pigs on sort of the acorn season in the winter, and then the slaughtering and the processing of that. And it was a remarkable experience. And being there it was like Ken Oringer and Chris Cosentino and Ming Tsai, like
fun hang right there.
Super fun hang. But what I was struck by was the level of respect and admiration these chefs had for how this process was really going down. And on top of all of that, there was this incredible story of just this pig that lives in the village off of the generosity of the villagers and develops a sense of relationship.
It's like a mascot of the town.
It really is, very much. His name is Anton. It's always called Anton year after year. And it just felt like this is a story one day that I would love to come back and tell. And I did tell it, a version of it in Great Ball of Pig, the Spain book I wrote. But being able to do a visual version of that was really special. And so we get to that central scene. And of course, there's been a lot of debate beforehand between Renee, myself, the director, a woman named Isabel Coixet, an incredible director who's actually my neighbor in Barcelona. How much do we show? Because this is largely a celebration in ways for an episode that otherwise could be very dark. Episodes about animals that we eat tend to be rather dark, and we try to find a different way into it.
Yeah, we talk about factory farms a lot here in the States, and of course, it's a horror show. Like, you can't really even start talking about it without having to, like, take your mind somewhere else.
I mean, and listen, I think we all have an understanding that the animals we eat, for the large part, are terribly mistreated. We wanted to show you the other side of that coin. Like, what happens when you don't do that? Or what happens when there's an entire culture built around a better version of that relationship? And so, I think for our taste, like, we would have showed even more, because we felt like we had earned that moment in a certain way by spending that time, by building up to it, by wanting to make this point that, sometimes you can't look away, or sometimes you shouldn't look away. Let's put it that way. If we want the privilege of being able to eat, the amount of meat that we eat in 2024, we should also maybe be familiar with where it comes from. And
of course, you've got those scenes of the hams hanging from Min that does you a great service. Of course, talk about like the most natural shot you could ever give, which is like these like cool Spanish guys like throwing salt on the legs of ham. I mean, it's beautiful work.
I mean, you're in this cathedral of fermentation and artistry. For me, jamón ibérico de bellota, like the acorn-fed ham that's aged for 4 or 5 years, is really one of the greatest expressions of human innovation, period. Full stop.
Let's dig into tuna. I asked Renee about how Japan changed the way tuna, which was previously considered a trash fish up until 1970s, became prized in Japan. So how do you, Matt, tell the story of this trajectory in this kind of short episode? It's a lot to unpack. You do such a great job doing that.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I mean, I think tuna was the episode that we used to really sell the idea internally to ourselves and then to Apple, because I think it was an adventure. It was kind of a thread that I had in my mind for a while about this idea of following, quote unquote, a single tuna from the wild tuna hunt in southern Spain that began 3,000 years ago with the Phoenicians to the auction floor of Toyosu Market, and then back out into the world where bluefin has become one of the most prized of all luxury ingredients. I think like having that sort of nose to tail, start to finish type of journey, that through line gives you a certain pace, a certain velocity.
Well, there's like a little bit of a cliffhanger because you're like, enter ...
That's right.
And then there's a beautiful montage of like archival airline footage from Japan.
And yeah, I think it's genuinely shocking or super interesting information to find out that a single executive possessed by the idea of getting fresh tuna from Nova Scotia to Tokyo before it spoiled was the one who pushed and pushed and pushed over years of innovation to find a way to get it into the belly of a 747. And he did. And that changed the tuna economy entirely. And it also changed the fate of this species, right? An apex predator suddenly went from being a relatively undervalued, it's called a trash fish. I mean, there are photos of mass graves of bluefin tuna in the United States in the 1940s and 50s. Cat food factories are largely where bluefin tuna ended up back then, to where it was in the early 2000s, a species pushed to the brink of extinction because that's how powerful the force of the human appetite is. And so really like it's about how much our taste can change the world, the physical, natural world around us. And how food has always been kind of the leading engine of globalization. I think the flip side of that, and what we try to get home in this episode, is that there's a very fine line between a vicious cycle and a virtuous cycle. Mm-hmm. We almost eat out of extinction in a matter of a few decades. The stakeholders in the tuna trade get together and they make a few smart tweaks to the quota system and the overall sort of vigilance on the species, and suddenly things are incredibly more sustainable. Doesn't mean they're perfect, doesn't mean there's not still work to be done, but that was seriously a few twists of the wrist, so to speak, that has turned it back from the brink.
Yeah, it's amazing that you kind of lay it out as these foodways that have been around for 3,000 years can be changed in like a presidential like cycle. Like it's like 4 years and it could be extinct. I mean, that's incredible to think about that.
That's how fast it happens, right? And that's how powerful our vote is, so to speak, because when we eat, that's what we're doing, right? I mean, we don't think of it like that, but we want to remind people that we make maybe we make a dozen food choices a day, and most of them are made kind of by routine or by necessity or whatever those things may be. But what if a few of those choices were made with just a little bit more awareness or a little bit more thoughtfulness? Like, what is the trickle-down effect of that awareness?
It's a little bit of like a butterfly effect as well.
I think so.
You know, a little bit of chance, a little bit of purpose, and you can definitely change a species to the good or for the bad.
Well, I think, we're in a situation where the problems that we're up against as a species and starting in the food world are so great that we need both a top-down approach and a bottom-up. We need leaders at the top of the sort of the political systems of the world making smart changes and doing the things that it takes to actually, have wholesale, large-scale change. But we also need people at the bottom, so to speak, the consumers, to be aware enough that they're pushing for those changes, right? And that they're making those changes themselves. And I think that to me is also essentially a representation of our challenge with climate change. There's no silver bullet. We need all of these things to happen at once.
Salt. It's like a big topic in cookbook publishing and food media in our world that we live in. It's also like really hard to write about it and talk about it because there are like no real rules with salt, and there's salt is foundational in cooking, but you can't say like X is the best salt because that just is impossible. So when you're thinking about building and writing an episode about salt, Matt, how do you tackle this idea that there really is no wrong when talking about salt, really?
I mean, you're excellently observed. I think without a doubt, when you think about the culinary aspects of salt, I think that we wanted to put aside sort of tasting notes to a certain extent.
Right.
We wanted to look at this as the history of salt is the history of us in a way. That was kind of the subtitle to the episode, and every one of these episodes has a subtitle that we use internally to kind of keep the North Star in focus. And so we wanted to find those individual building blocks and think about how did taxation of salt by the Chinese government establish the imperial army and the building of the Great Wall, sort of like one of the first examples of food building economic and political structures. How does salt affect our biology? How does salt really truly seep into every facet of our lives? And then go out and try to build scene by scene examples of that. And so we start in Djibouti, in Lake Assal, one of the lowest points in the planet. And it could be shot at any moment over the last 2,000 years because it's a camel caravan where, the salt harvester is still bringing giant blocks of salt out of the desert on the back of camels. And that wasn't made for us. That wasn't a recreation.
Mm-hmm.
That was shot by a guy who still does this week after week today. One of the last, to be sure. But, I think that was probably the most sort of Planet Earth, or for me personally, Baraka, which is a film that was a huge inspiration for this series.
Yeah, it was brought up by Renee as well.
Yeah, Baraka was a huge, huge one. It's not well known, but I think visually and the pacing of it and the storytelling of it. But, we wanted to follow those building blocks and feel like we were kind of building up to something larger, which was essentially a recipe for our own humanity, which, is sort of the implicit concept album, if you will, for season 1.
I love that you say season 1, which makes me think there's hope for season 2. And I suggest that you listen to my talk with Renee. I go long with Renee about the coffee episode, so I don't want to repeat that, but it's like my favorite episode, and you really do a service. Absolutely.
Amazing.
I've never seen a washing station portrayed in that way on like a mass scale. I've seen like YouTube, of course, but the fact that it's on Apple TV, and I think the fact that you trace, a cherry harvest to a hauling station, to a green coffee roaster in America, to the barista, and then you just ultimately realize how much of that coffee is actually thrown away.
It's insane,
right?
It really is.
It's insane. Like,
but
coffee should be so much more expensive.
It should be. It really should be. I mean, the subtitle of coffee for us internally was "Coffee is a Miracle." Like, it is an actual expression, this incredible expression of who we are, because we're talking about a wild berry, a wild cherry on a tree in a cloud forest in Ethiopia that, without our intervention or without sort of our sort of quote unquote discovery of it, it's just that, right? It's nothing more. And someone comes along and, mythically it's the great goat herder Kaldi, who discovers that his goat is his flock of goats have been eating these berries and are suddenly possessed of an incredible energy, and throws them into the fire and roasts these things, and out comes coffee. However it came about, the fact of the matter is that we took something like that, transformed it into this elixir, and then found a way to bring this elixir all across the world. And what it takes to actually do that is, to me, one of the things that most makes us human. It's complex collaboration over incredible distances. Mm-hmm. And we do that in the case of coffee, oftentimes with 40 or 50 individuals, each of them an expert in a tiny little link of the chain. And then yet it gets to us and we're like, yeah, $1 for coffee, that feels like a lot. Or we,
right.
I think we sometimes, we make fun or sort of are derogatory towards high-end coffee places because they're maybe precious or twee or they're this or they're too earnest. But the fact of the matter is that kind of coffee, specialty coffee, if you will, is a very different sort of social force than commodity coffee, which comes out from the dregs of colonization, is taxing both to the labor force, to the earth itself, has these hidden costs that we as a consumer don't see or don't think about. And I think that's true with all ingredients, right? The true cost of food is never what it actually says at the supermarket.
Yeah, well said, Matt. Thank you for reiterating a big theme on our show, and listeners will know that. And really, whenever you slap commodity in front of a product, you know there's trouble. And when you're selling coffee by weight, and not by farm or by origin, you're in trouble. So once again, listener, if you like a coffee and you see that there's a farm, finca, something mentioned on the bag, it might cost a little more because there's actually people there, you know?
And I think here's like the piece of context. Look, everyone's trying to do their best, right? And it's just not trying to be an elitist argument where it says everyone should have enough money in their lives to spend it on expensive coffee or, heritage pork or whatever. The voice and I think the overall tone of the series is not meant to be dogmatic or preachy. It's really supposed to be, this is how the food world works, and it's wondrous and amazing and also harrowing and challenging. But the fact of the matter is that in 2024, this generation, we've never spent less on food. We as Americans spend about 12% of our overall annual income.
You're like copying my line. I've used that so many times.
Have you? It is. But
I use this line a lot. Listeners will know.
So they know this, and you're doing the work to be saying that because it's actually at the key of so many of our problems. The absolute heart of it comes down to, we went from being a culture or a species that all of our resources were spent, so to speak, on food, to being one where we expect none of them to be. And there has to be somewhere in between where the price that we're willing to pay and the cost that is being passed on to us has to be commensurate to the effort, not just for the individual workers, but what the resources extracted from the earth, the health, so to speak, of the entire food chain. And until we can solve those problems, it's really hard to imagine how we solve any other problems.
Yeah, it's just to normalize paying more for food and agree it's a privileged position to be able to buy Iberico hams and spend $25 on a bag of coffee. So recognizing that fully, but to normalize, like say in Korea, which I've studied, it's like 35% of income is goes towards food, and I'm sure there's other examples. I'm sure Spain is higher as well.
Spain is, exactly. I think Spain is right in between at about 20. Yeah. But that 8%, depending on which study you're looking at, that difference though actually is a huge difference in the welfare of the people in the system itself, and of course the land that's providing these resources. And so, we're not talking about dramatically shifting every one of your eating patterns. I think it's just, again, recognizing that if a few of those decisions that you make, a few of those things can be just a little bit better, the impact is, it's real. It's very real.
So Matt, about the show, what's the episode that didn't make it in? And I would assume be part of season 2. You gotta check out the show on Apple TV Plus. Omnivore, watch the show because that's how season 2 is made. You're going to love it. I've been saying this for weeks now. The show is one of the best shows to come out around about food in a long time. So
I really appreciate
yeah,
it.
I mean
I
it.
truly do. I mean, so many. Grape, honestly, is one
Yeah.
of them, right at top of mind. Really a kind of a love letter to the potion that we press from grapes, is one that Renee and I are really, really excited about, and we'd love to be able to tell. But the truth is, like, you just walk into a market, and everywhere you look is an episode. And I think there's a version of this where everything from a sesame seed to a watermelon has something really special to say about us. And that's kind of the point of this. And I also think that we want to get better at this. A first season of anything is tough to do.
Yeah.
It
Well, you're
really
also
is.
on Apple, where this is one of the first unscripted food shows they've done, if not the first.
The first. So
Yeah,
far.
truly. So you're like canary in the coal mine a bit with this great streaming service. Shout out Masters of the Air. I was a fan of the show, to be honest.
Amazing.
I check out Apple TV. But tell me, how does it get to season 2?
I mean, look, I think it's really ultimately about just getting enough people to watch it. I mean, we feel good about the quality of the show.
Yeah.
I should say that with a big, huge caveat of saying, at the same time, I think both Renee and I feel like we're kind of flying blind into the critical feedback, because I have a sense of its relative merits, but I don't know if it's going to land. I don't know how people are going to take it. This week has done a lot to change that, because I've been talking to a lot of people, and we've had a chance to screen it now a couple of times. And so you're starting to kind of see a bit of the reaction. You're starting to think, maybe it will land. Maybe this does make sense. Maybe that thing that you had in your head is actually on the screen that people can understand and recognize. But so I feel pretty good, at least where we're standing right now. I just hope that, that people are hungry for something a little bit different in the food world. That's not necessarily about what we're used to watching in food, which is the end of the food chain.
Which
It's
is
the cooking,
travelogue,
the
yeah.
eating and the cooking
Yeah.
of food, which there is that, don't get me wrong. And when we do it, we try to do it really well and make it really delicious, because ultimately flavor and taste has to be a part of the equation, because that's also the change factor, as Renee would say. But yeah, man, I mean, I would love for people to find something that meaningful for them individually in these episodes.
Matt, on This Is Taste, we ask guests about their discerning taste. So to close this interview, here's a little rapid fire, fast and furious taste check. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
The best fruit.
Mango.
Any variety, any time of year, any spot, or
I mean, I could say an Alfonso mango, because I know how impassioned people are about them. But the truth is, I'm kind of an equal opportunity mango consumer.
I love it. The worst vegetable.
Eggplant.
Yeah.
I honestly call it my purple kryptonite. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'll eat it.
Yeah.
We're professionals. We eat anything.
Gotta eat anything.
But yeah.
Go to
sure.
Thailand, have like a Thai eggplant dish.
That version. I mean,
It'll
I
slap,
have
yeah.
like the spongy, oil-soaked Italian version in my mind, and I
Yeah.
kind of have a bad thing with that.
Yeah. The best dessert.
A coulant, man. The old just that melty chocolate puck. It's honestly like it gets me every time.
Such a good call. It hasn't come up yet. I love that. Their favorite New York City restaurant.
Oh man, dude. Can I say sambar? I mean,
It's hilarious. Renee said the same thing.
did he really?
He said that, and I'm like, yo, bro, like 2005 Sambar,
I
put
know,
that on there.
I know. Well, here's the thing. I lived right above it.
Yeah.
Right next door to it. And,
Yeah.
and that to me is still like that restaurant relationship in my mind that I'm looking for anywhere.
Yeah, a little bit of like American ham and red eye mayo.
Oh man.
That plate.
So good.
Quite the pity that is no more.
Well, it still lives on in my mind. It also probably shows my hand that I have not spent enough time in New York over the last 5 years.
No, it's all good, buddy. Your favorite European restaurant?
Ultramarinos Marin. It's a Barcelona restaurant right down the street from my house where I live. It's run by a guy named Borja, who is a mad genius of fire. It's product driven, it's smoke driven, and it's exactly the kind of place that you want in your neighborhood.
Did he make it on the show? Did you shoot there?
We didn't, and actually, I want to do an episode of a big show that's coming up that I'm just playing a guide for, and he's actually the kind of guy who's like, you know what, I appreciate it, but that's not my jam.
Yeah.
I just want to be back in the kitchen. He's a little bit like Vitor from Echevarri.
Yeah.
Like he just wants to do the work.
Yeah, he's not trying to get like those like fans taking selfies.
No,
and
not
stuff.
playing with it. But he's a chef's chef.
That's
Like
cool.
every chef that comes to Barcelona goes right there.
Your favorite American fast food chain?
In and out. I'm a California boy. I'm going there tomorrow, and honestly, I've thought about that first double-double moment so many times. So I also realize that a lot of that is based on my own nostalgia and not just the absolute objective qualities of their burger and fries, but it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Food is ultimately a strange cocktail of emotions. So
well said, buddy. Your favorite cookbook of all time?
I'm going to say The French Laundry, not because I cooked from it. Occasionally I tried things, but I think what they did there, Michael Ruhlman and Thomas Keller, was really special in terms of writing about food, writing about producers, these little mini essays, the building of that book, the wonder that I think it sort of instilled in me as a young cook and as a young writer. Still to this day, I carry that around with me.
I love that book. It's cool that you mentioned that. I feel like it's maybe still in the top 5 or 10 rotation for like gifts in the holiday season.
It's so good. It really is. It still stands up, honestly.
Couple more cuisine you would like to learn more about.
Indian cuisine. Honestly, I feel I'm super ignorant when it comes to Indian. I mean, I love it, and I try to eat it as often as I can when there's a good option around me, especially if I'm here in the city. I'm like, I think we're trying to go to Senma tonight, actually.
Hope you can get in. I think it's an amazing spot.
Yeah, I think Renee's got that unlocked.
I think Renee could probably pull some strings.
We'll see, but that is definitely the cuisine.
Last one, your favorite sandwich?
BLT all day. Honestly, might be my death row meal too. Like, I'm just a BLT head.
Can you do a BLT the way you grew up eating BLTs in Spain?
I can now because I can get, sorry, but I get Oscar Mayer bacon, you know?
You can get that in Spain. Okay.
You can, because the truth is Spaniards do a cured pork belly that has nothing to do with Spanish,
of course,
with American bacon. Even the versions that they do don't quite match up. So I can get Hellman's, I can get Oscar Mayer, I can get really beautiful sort of bib lettuce or soft, that's what else.
Soft bread, and then of course you get
soft
tomatoes.
Bread. Yeah,
easy.
I'm not really trying to reinvent the wheel here. What I will do actually is I do a lot of chili crisp on my BLTs now, which I definitely wasn't doing when I was a kid.
It's a smart move. I've never really thought about it.
It's super good. Honestly, try that, man.
Can you get chili crisp in Spain then, obviously?
I can. Yeah, you can. And actually there's I get a beautiful like Mexican style version with like morita chilies that is outrageous for the BLT. So
I love it.
That's the move.
Matt Golding, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining this.
Thanks, man. Let's do this again. It was great.
This is Taste is hosted by Eliza Abarbanel and me, Matt Rodbard. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things that are happening.